So let's do some math on these very super conservative statistics. Typically, if you had 2 to 3 locations of a child care center, if you have 60 employees and every year you turned over 40% of them, you're basically spending $79,000 on turnover. Now imagine those numbers from what you said with $30,000 for how much you invested all the time and effort, everybody around there. This does not include what I would say are even the bigger numbers. This does not include the loss of productivity that's going on because now you're down a preschool teacher. This does not include the dismay for families as their favorite staff member just left. And now they're going to start coming all hands on. If you lose a teacher in process, then you have your assistant directors, you have your director, you have yourself in the classroom, working in the classroom, and all it does is work in the office is no longer being done. We know the story, so there's no reason to hash it all out. We understand that rather well. But when you look at it, just one individual on the most conservative side, you're looking at 80 grand for not just one individual, but 40% of your workforce in a year if you had that kind of turnover. So what we've come up with is what I call the child care success pyramid. And this has come from a lot of conversations with owners, a lot of research. We really see it made up of 3 key pillars. One is employee engagement. Employee engagement is the idea of how do you have someone really feel like they're truly part of the organization. 2 is brand identity. And what I mean by brand identity, it's not your logo. Brand identity is, what do your staff think of you? What do your parents think of you? And by the way, I will have a handout that summarizes a lot of this for you later too. Okay, but brand identity is, what do your staff think of you as your company? What do your parents think of you? What does the community think of you? When they're sitting in a restaurant and they're talking to a friend, are they bad-mouthing you? Or are they actually saying, you gotta find a way to come work here? In the community, when they drive by, are they like, that's an awesome place? Or are they like, oh God, that place in there, they got issues. What are they thinking about you? And the other thing that we all deal with is ownership and leading and running these centers and operating them is having the most precious stuff, time and money to actually do these things. It's all nice to talk about doing them, but actually having the time and money to do them are critical. And if you can get these together, if you can get that employee engagement paired up with that brand and that time and money, what you're gonna have is an amazing culture. And I know that Chris has talked a lot to you folks about culture. And culture is critical because I'm oftentimes criticized, maybe mocked by my staff at times when I talk to them. And the reason is in my childcare business is I'm full of these cliches. And one thing I say so often in our business is that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And oftentimes when we're struggling with issues, with hiring issues, with issues because we're trying to handle a parent situation or even a child behavioral situation that we have going on. We have some kind of situation going on. A lot of times people are like, we gotta fix this right now. It's like, yes, but we also have to take a breath. We have to really think about what we're doing. So you've heard a lot about having the right person in the right seat. We're gonna talk a lot about that too today. Okay, it's a marathon to get an amazing culture. But at the end of the day, I would say that if you want enrollment growth, you can do a lot of the things that you've been talking about here and you've been talking as part of this program, which are amazing, which is great. But part of that is, in the long run, if you can build an amazing, sustainable culture, it is a bit of the secret sauce to enrollments, to retaining, to doing the things to make sure that you have that brand identity that you are sort of seeking. So let's talk a little bit about employee engagement. And I call this walking the line. What do I mean by walk the line? So, let's talk first about just personal relationships. I don't want to get too deep in here. I'm not a Dr. Phil by any means, and I'll probably get in trouble otherwise. But I would say with walking the line that everybody has a line in personal relationships. When you have a spouse or a significant other, there's a certain line that we all have. And that line, we don't exactly know how to articulate it. But there's a line where if someone crosses you crosses that line, it doesn't matter how nice they are. It doesn't matter how much money they have. It doesn't matter what a wonderful person they are. If they cross that line, you're done. You've had too much. There's a certain point that we all have in relationships that we have a line. And if you cross that line, now I would tend to say that guys' lines are sometimes a little wavy. They're not sometimes the straightest line, you know. But I know that some people have a very straight line, and once you cross it, there's no coming back. Well, it's the same way with your staff. Your staff all have that same line. And we don't know where it is. And honestly, even if you ask your staff members, they don't know where it is. They don't understand exactly what it is to get there. So trying to find out where this line is very difficult because you really can't ask anybody. But what you can do is you can focus on your culture and really work towards building an amazing culture and push that line out as far as you possibly can. So, culture, it offers an immediate benefit that can be felt in real time. This is really the focus of the generation that is coming and we are working with right now as many of our teachers. Some of us have teachers that have been here since the 80s working for us, the 90s. But a lot of us have a predominant share of the millennial generation who's come in. And when I first was dealing with a lot of my staff and my millennial generation that had come in, my first thing was to be resistant, was to be frustrated, to be like, I can't believe it that they just left in the middle of the day and they have a room full of kids. I can't believe that that is happening. And I started complaining about it. But like everything else, you complain about it and you start sounding like a victim. And to lead, you really can never be in a victim role. You have to be in a leadership role and you have to start trying to solve those issues. So we really tried to look at why is it that a lot of the millennial generation tend to leave so quick. Yes?
I was at a training yesterday about, we were talking about this very thing.
Yeah.
I read a statistic that says that pay is the fourth reason why anybody leaves.
You nailed it, because
Management's number one.
if you talk to generation back at Gen X, which I'm part of, or baby boomer, pay would be even higher.
But the millennials,
But the millennials,
no,
pay doesn't really matter.
no, it really doesn't. And they're even building whole communities now all over the United States where there are these small 500-600 square foot places to live because they say, why do I need all this space? I'm not living there. I'm living out in my community.
And
So they don't need a lot of money to do that.
that's right.
And they're about their passion. They're about their drive. They're about what's important to them. That's what they want to do. It's really cool.
It is cool, but figuring out how to work within that environment is our challenge. But you're right, that's exactly where it's getting to. It's getting to this community environment, this community kind of atmosphere. And it's not easy because it's sort of a moving target. Before it'd be like I just increased pay. But also, increased pay is not always the answer. When I acquired one of my centers, one of the centers that I acquired, the owner at the time, very well intended, she got a better benefit. It was a value for her. She was paying her teachers $20 an hour. She was making 7% margin annually for her even. Okay? The reason is when I asked her, why do you pay your staff so much? And she says as well, because they're really my family and I want them around me. And so her big value was that she even gave up pay, the idea for her getting paid, to almost basically be paying for friends. She kept them on for a long time, but when I took them over, they were like, I want $25 an hour. I'm like, not all. So there is this enigma, and you're starting to hit on it. You hit the enigma with the millennial generation. So let me ask you this. How many of you have maybe a predominant amount of your staff under the age of 30? Okay? So you are squarely working within the millennial generation. To capture and retain younger employees, tout your culture as one of your company's main selling points, I would tend to say your culture is your selling point. Your culture is the reason why people will come with you. Your culture is not a standalone item. It is a moving, working, flowing item. We'll talk about this too. Follow through on what you promise. In this career cast about why millennial value culture above everything else, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Limited professional development opportunities are symptoms of early childhood systems that are under-resourced and fragmented. Now, the reason I go here too is because we are in this interesting conundrum as childcare owners. We have a system where we're always in ratio. We have to be in ratio. And then we have compliance training, a thing that we must provide, and either have them out seeking it or us providing it ourselves. We only have so much time in a day, and we're maxing out our best people at 40 hours a week. So then are we paying for training and development after hours, time and a half, on weekends, when they're exhausted? How are we doing that? But that's on top of just for compliance. What they miss out on oftentimes, which you don't often get in other medium-sized or small businesses that don't need someone in a room for a very specific time for a specific ratio, is professional development. Professional development is something that our industry really lacks and we struggle with. It's not because there's not providers out there doing it, it's just that we're trying to find a way to infuse it into the day is a bit of a challenge. But the opportunity of culture is centered around how do you help people develop? How do you help people get that thirst for growing? We talk about being early learning centers, but how do they grow? So let's talk about how do we push the line out as far as possible. And I'll tell you, we're going to go over a number of things here, and then our outcome page, which will be handed out to you in a little bit at the very end, will also have this summarized for you, okay? So our objective would be, and by the way, any questions so far? Okay, so our objective would be is how do we get this line way out here? So first is something that you folks have been talking about a lot, and it looks like Chris, if you already haven't known, has introduced you to the book Traction. And that's a really good recommendation on Chris's part for you folks. It's a very solid, deep recommendation in the sense that, Chris and I were having a cocktail last night. We were talking a little bit about the fact that it's a great book. It sort of applies to anybody who reads it, but in our childcare business, some of those things really apply well, and there's other things that you have to tweak for your world. But one of the things that's really important up front are your values. And when you look at what your values are, it's how you determine your values. Now, I haven't been part of this. Have you guys talked about values and developing your values for your organization much in here? Have you? Okay, good. So that's great because then this just tags onto that. And for the idea of focusing on how you create those values and what you make as part of those values becomes fundamental to your culture. Recruiting. When you're recruiting, are your values core to your recruitment strategy? Are your values the elements of what you recruit on and how you position it? You can just post for the job. When you're hiring, you can post for that job. You can say, hey, listen, we're looking for teachers, people who want to play in the sandbox or get dirty, what have you, and try to do some really creative, fun things there. But at the end of the day, are you selling the job, are you selling the pay rate, or are you selling the culture as to where you're coming? When you're doing it, when you're chasing enrollments, you're talking about an experience that those children are going to have. What is the experience that those kids and those families are going to have? Are you doing the same when you're hiring? Are you talking about the experience that they're going to have and what their expectations are? And then when you onboard, we talked about onboarding, we'll talk a little bit about it more. Onboarding is absolutely critical. What does onboarding do for you? Let me see it when it comes to orientation. Yeah.
Outline your expectations and
Absolutely. It outlines your expectations and makes sure you're connecting with the team. So I don't mean to be oversimplified, and I wasn't in part of this earlier, but why is it critical to have strong expectations? Who is it? They know what they're supposed to do. But it sounds easy, right? Is it easy to make sure everybody has the right expectations? If you work hard enough, yes. But it's not easy. It doesn't come easy, but it does take, and that's why I started talking about, it might be a little bit more of a science than an art when you look at orientation and how you make sure people are oriented. How many people do mentoring when someone is hired? Guys, your hands just a little higher so everybody can see them. So we talk about mentoring. How many measure the mentoring process? Donna, what do you need?
Well, we just do it like surveys to the new staff, what was helpful, what didn't work, just monitoring how they're doing, watching, you know.
Absolutely.
teaching them.
Absolutely. You talk about, how do you manage what you can't measure? So we talk about orientation and expectations and mentoring, but how do you measure it? How do you actually have it measured if you can't have numbers around it or have expectations as to what's happening when? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then performance expectations. May I see a set of hands? How many people are doing performance expectations and performance reviews? Okay. How many of you do them annually? How about every 6 months? Okay. How about every quarter? All right. You said every quarter. Why every quarter?
Just to kind of track the progress, continue to set up SMART goals for them. So we do quarterly, 6 month, we do all the quarters.
Yeah.
But build each year, each quarter, where were we at before, what did you do? Just kind of keeping it fresh in the mind.
Absolutely.
And we kind of also do it over the course of the week as well, because we do positive, neutral, and corrective actions. So we kind of document everything because I'll forget.
Yeah.
So I have to note the positive things you're doing, the neutral things you're doing, and the negative. So it builds into their SMART goals.
Awesome. How do you collect that?
It's all electronically, and then there's ratings to it that the leadership team uses.
Fantastic. What you're doing there is, when she's doing that, what is she doing with her staff members? Say again?
Holding them accountable.
Holding them accountable, absolutely.
And like, know that you think about them. You have a plan for them.
That
They know you're thinking about them.
they know you're thinking about them. Creating trust. Why is it creating trust?
They don't feel bad.
They don't feel abandoned. They feel like you're actually engaged with them. That it's part of it. This is what it's about, is you are communicating with them. There's a book out there, if you haven't read it, called Crucial Conversations. Has anybody read that? What do you think of that book?
I had a lot of good ideas in it. I mean, we did it as a whole company did it together, and so you could see where you scored as a team. I think it helped a lot.
We did it with our company. We did it like a book club.
Mm-hmm.
We did it where we did every chapter once a week, every week in our leadership meeting. It was the front end of our leadership meeting. This book called Crucial Conversations that really talked about how do you have those conversations? How do people know that you're really engaged? How do they know where your leadership and your vision is? How are they getting connected to your expectations? How are they knowing that we're all on the same page, focused on the same values? Okay? Professional development. We talked about that a few minutes ago. Absolutely critical to find a way to get involved. And then rewards. What are typically some kind of rewards that you may do that you think are unique for your staff? Why aren't you doing and I know why you're not doing it because it's sort of a new idea, but there's no reason you can't do it. They're just as important, if not more important, than a prospect, than a tour. If you were to have a landing page set up as what they fill out when they're interested, if they have the ability to fill in that landing page, it goes into your CRM and can immediately start a campaign. it can send back a thank you. That you will be receiving a call in this amount of time for this place, and then your director, assistant director, administrator, whoever's hiring, then gets notified. And then they have an opportunity to meet a specific time frame that you've asked them to fill out and respond and call and contact. Yes?
So I have a question. So I know, like, for me, kind of what you're speaking of, the challenge is finding that CRM that will do that to that degree, because the CRM that we use, it doesn't really set up for that. Now my payroll system has the ability, once it does a post, it definitely captures, and we're able to kind of track everything, and I'm able to tag who should assign tasks to certain people like the CRM, but as far as doing a drip campaign, I can't do that. No, ma'am.
What's that?
So there are certainly, for instance, I talked with Chuck, and he said, yes, you can actually probably work his system for it. There's other CRMs, for instance, we use on the Inspire Care 360 side, outside of the Childcare CRM, we use Infusionsoft, and we're able to configure it that way. There's a number of different CRM environments that you can actually do it with, but you do have to look into it. It's not that much different though. When you really fundamentally think about it, it's someone who has an interest in your environment. There's not much difference between a prospect and a potential candidate. They're very similar if you think about the whole process. If you're able to bring them in and work them through the environment, take all your notes in a central area, isn't that interesting that we now have it all centralized in electronic format that you're able to go back at? And you know what, 3 years later, I've had the thing when I go, I recognize this person's name who's applying for this job. And I'm going chasing, where can I find who that person, and found out they were approaching us 3 years ago. We did research and we decided not to go with that person. Anybody have a situation like that? Yeah. So you'd be surprised, many people who keep on coming back to you even after you've decided to pass on them. And then once you are more values-based, when you look at being more values-based, you can start using those job postings in a more interesting way when you are putting out in social media, or getting them out through your staff, or out through your parents that are there and into the community, because those jobs actually get a lot more meat around it. What kind of environment are we hiring for? We're looking for someone to have this kind of environment. When you're putting out a job posting like that too, what is it also doing for you outside of recruiting?
It's setting up our expectations.
Say?
It's setting up our culture's expectations before they even come in.
Absolutely.
Showing that you're growing.
Shows you that you're definitely growing. Absolutely. What else? Isn't it marketing too? Isn't it telling the community, this is what you believe in, this is what you expect from your staff, these are the kind of people that make up our center, this is why we are wonderful and we have a great culture, especially when you go culture first. So there is a lot of opportunities. Yes, you can obviously post it Indeed and the other ones that are out there. Then recruiting, of course, culture first. But are you doing your values, and are you hiring based on your values? Or are you just interviewing? Where have you worked before? How long have you worked there? Tell me about stressful times that you've handled with children. Tell me about the blah, 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 blah. How do you handle conflict? All those kind of things that are the typical. Are those really aligned to your values? Are they aligned to your culture? Or are you hiring first based on what your cultural fit is going to be? How many people use personality indexes for hiring? Do we know what a personality index is? Okay, so I'll just describe it because I saw a few heads nod. Have anybody heard of like the DISC or Myers-Briggs or those things?
Yeah.
There's a lot of tools out there with personality indexes. The value of them, they're not, it's not mystical. It's not going to tell you something about somebody that you don't know to a degree, but it helps validate behavioral traits. I wish I had this because I know when I had a director about 4 years ago, she's a wonderful, sweet lady who's not with us anymore at the center. She's with us hopefully on Earth. But she's not with us at the center anymore. But the one thing about her is she was wildly passive. She hated conflict. She did not like to be in a situation where she had to ask for money. How many of those make a great director? If I use a personality index, she did a great interview. She did an amazing interview. I thought she hung the moon when she interviewed. But when she actually got in there, her traits were all against conflict. All day long, a director is dealing with conflict. That's what, walking in at 8 o'clock in the morning, the staff member is and saying, okay, I have to get out at 10 today. I gotta go to a doctor's appointment. Well, what are you, crazy? We don't have anybody at 10. I know, but I just gotta go. None of us have heard that. So, personality indexes are really not that expensive. It is something we've infused into what we're bringing along in our solution, Inspired Care 360. The other things that you can add into, which you should be, is when you're trying out a teacher in a classroom, how many people do that?
It's one of our cores.
It's one of your cores. Now, how many are actually measuring that event? What does that mean?
We had a score sheet.
Yeah.
The teacher was scored like different category and given the points.
Wonderful. Wonderful. How do you do it?
Same way.
Same way? And what are those categories based on? Sorry. How you doing? Good. So, this is what we're talking about when it comes to it. What are the things that you're really looking for? I have their smiles often. That's a value. Getting down on your knees with the kids. That's a value. Being able to have a straight up conversation and not running around and not giving a straight answer. That's a value. I think, Chris, was it McKinsey who does the Gumby value? I think out of the traction book when you'll read it. And the Gumby values, they have, one of their values is Gumby. And what that means is happy with everybody, gets along, wildly flexible. I think they left off green. But they basically have a value to articulate. Another company has one that's just called No Jerks. It's a value. It's something that, can you measure it? I don't know if you can measure it, but you can definitely identify it. Sometimes not up in the interviewing process, but you can try your best. Onboarding. Now, onboarding is critical. How many do new hire orientations? Okay? How many of those new hire orientations are given during the day, during the business day? How many of them are done on a weekend? How many are done at nighttime? How many of those new hire orientations are done within an hour? Okay? How many are done within 3 hours? Okay, there's no wrong answer here. It's, how many are done within a full day? Okay? How many of those new hire orientations are comprehensively based on your values? How many of them set up expectation on your values? How many of them are measurable in the sense of knowing when they're done? How many of them, those new hire orientations, are actually given to the employee prior to their first day? Good. Why would it be important to get it to them before the first day? Absolutely. New hire orientation is critical as to what you're going for your culture and setting those expectations. Remember the quote before with millennials. If you're missing expectations, you're going to be missing them in a while. So, detailed handbook. I'm sure a lot of you have handbooks. Most of you probably have handbooks. It's a bit of our little, our sacred scriptures for our businesses. When I first started, we updated our handbook maybe every couple of years. Start realizing that when it came time to have a performance conversation, those elements of core values and what we expect out of people and what are the elements of what they can do and can't do in our environment, as well as all the state regs, many times are way out of date. Our handbooks went from 33 pages to well over 100 pages now. Our handbooks we've actually now made into e-learning that they actually go through. So that's a good place for us to stop just for 1 second and talk about how people learn. So a little bit about my background that Chris mentioned was, I was in the adult learning world for companies. We built out learning for many different kind of corporations, many type of individuals on how people learn as adults. And what is the expectation if you are doing a face-to-face meeting with somebody and you're training them face-to-face? What is just the training face-to-face? What is the retention on that approximately? Guess. Close. Say again?
10%.
Spot on. 10%. So if you're doing a virtual presentation to somebody on the web, if you're doing a conversation, if you're showing a PowerPoint to your staff, 10% retention rate. What ups that to 20%? A little bit. It's actually having a test at the end. If you do a test at the end of that conversation, by the way, there's a test at the end of this. There's a 20% retention rate, still miserably low. How do you get to 50%? Say?
Having them actually practice what they're learning.
Demonstrate it. A role play, right? Can they role play it? 50%. 50% retention. How do you get them to 80%? That's the holy grail because you can't get to 100. How do you get to 80%?
Teach it.
Teach it. What does that mean?
Demonstrate it to others and convey that information. That demonstrates your knowledge and understanding of the material.
So do it in a environment like this, or do it in an environment like your center.
A simulated environment or the actual environment.
So when you do it in a simulated environment, that's your demonstration of 50%. If you actually say, let's go and now see, conduct a circle time, you're now going up to 80%. Application of knowledge. 10% is for a presentation or a conversation. Since I don't have a test here, I got 10% straight. Unless we're going to have an application of knowledge when we get back, hopefully. 20% is what? Test. I just did a test. 50% is what? Demonstration, role play. And how do you get to the holy grail of 80%? They actually apply their knowledge in the environment. And you can then measure that. So when you are doing, whether it be your handbooks, whether it be a new hire orientation, whether it be a mentoring program, all of these can actually be brought much higher than they probably are today. The handbook alone could easily be brought up to 50%. A new hire orientation can probably be brought about 50% of asking them questions. We do a scavenger hunt. Scavenger hunt is, we say at the end of doing the new hire orientation, now what we'd like you to do is go around the center and talk to different teachers about these different questions. And then we want you to bring that back, and since we do a lot of this with e-learning, they have to come back and actually put those answers in as to what they got. That does two things. One, it tells us that they're actually applying their knowledge. The other thing, well, in a demonstrated environment, the other thing is that teacher that they asked actually know what they're talking about. But mentoring programs. So mentoring program is another thing. How am I doing on time, Chris? I just got a few minutes.
You're so good.
Thank you. So with mentoring, trackable and measurable. What we used to do before we applied our IC360 principles in it is we used to do mentoring where we came in and I said, all right, now Nancy, I want you to sit with Donna, and Donna is going to put you under her wing, and Donna's going to show you the ropes. We'll see you later. Okay? And then we come back to Donna, and a week later, how'd it go? I don't know if Nancy still works for us. Mentoring is one of those environments where if you look at it, you're trying to strive for the value that you really get out of it. The apprentice-mentor relationship is a fantastic practice that we have a lot of value in, we can have a lot of value in. But to take full advantage of it, you want your mentoring practice, again, to not only be about processes, not only to be about tasks, but what are they doing to get involved and actually apply it? Are they taking what they've learned and what the opportunity is, and is the mentor, are they actually watching the mentoree sit down and conduct a circle time? And then that mentoree, after they've done it, are they going back and reporting on what their experience is? And if they're doing that, what level of learning are they getting? Were they applying their knowledge? They were. They're getting 80%. If you have in a mentoring program that they're actually going around and actually doing these different tasks and then coming back and reporting on what their experience was for those different tasks. So it is actually very measurable. Now you would think, well, that's going to take forever. No, this is setting up a process. These are all just setting up processes that once you have it established, you can start to build that marathon, not that sprint. And by the way, we probably could pass out this sheet if we hadn't already passed out this sheet. These are all, by the way, they're all coming to you in the sheet, as I mentioned before. So performance expectations, the same thing. You're basing it on your values and your culture, not just performance metrics. I know I had something drop off up there, but it was supposed to say, a lot of times we have things that are just, everybody's like, well, you can't measure it if it's not a number. Well, in our business, it's sometimes tough to do that. But can you look at the subjective elements of what our values are and add them in? If you can do them twice, possibly quarterly, you're that much better off. You don't have to do them really long. You can actually do short bursts of them to measure different things at different times and repeat them in much shorter time frame. But you stay like we talked about before, you stay engaged. Right? Okay. Professional development. This is outside of basic compliance. Professional development is sort of it's really an important piece of this. How many do you have where you're actually able to take that opportunity and make yourself a true learning environment? We talk about being a learning environment for the kids, but how oftentimes are we giving learning opportunities beyond compliance to our staff? So it's like, they can only go through Shake and Baby so many times. But how many times have they gone through conflict resolution? How many times have they gone through ethics training, harassment training? How many times have they gone through how to hold a meeting, how to lead? How many times have your staff really started to develop? If you're giving professional development, what is that doing for your organization? Sorry?
You're building leaders.
You're building leaders. You're building professionals. You know what? When we talked earlier about what develops a culture in a community, it's having that opportunity to grow. It's having that opportunity to develop. It's like, well, they're investing in me. I want to be here. There's investment in myself. So that can also be measured and tracked. Reward programs, we already talked about them. Employee of the Month. We also do something called the Hustle Award. The Hustle Award, we do both with our centers as well as sometimes in just classrooms. Who was for the past month the one that the classroom that hustled the most? That they went all out, that they really went an extra mile. They get a pizza party out of it. Who are the Hustle Award winners? It's not a bad program for us. Everybody loves that competition. They want to be that Hustle Award winner, and they go the extra mile. It's something that they're able to look at and say, we have them up here that are preschool 2-room Hustle Award winners for May. That's not going to happen again by preschool 1. It's going to be us. In career path, we talked a little bit about this career pathing, but it's a clear opportunity and expectations up front. Because we're childcare centers, we oftentimes think, oh, we're a very flat organization. There might be an assistant teacher, there may be a teacher, there may be an assistant director, there may be a director, or that director may even be me. There's not much here. I can't really show a career path. But actually you can. If you're basing it on your values, there's no reason that you couldn't have a junior assistant, to have them become an assistant, to be a junior lead, to become a lead, to become a program lead. And these have ramifications because they're meeting your performance expectations and they're meeting your values. So a little bit of feedback here. What are your thoughts about this? What questions do you have? Is this valuable? Yeah? How many people think this is impossible to implement? How many people think, you know what, if I just put pen to paper, I can figure some of this out pretty well? Okay? The fact is, there are a lot of processes, there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of function. One of the things that's happening in our market today is our market is sophisticated. When I went to Chris's show 3 years ago, there were 8 vendors there. I went this year and there was what, maybe, Diane, 40, 30, somewhere's in there?
37.
37 vendors. And most of them are electronic vendors. What does that mean to you? Why is there these vendors that are coming? Why did Tony come up with Inspire Care 360? There's a need, but there's also the mentality of we need to sophisticate at this point. We've got the pressures of increasing minimum wages. We've got the pressures of increasing salaries. We have the pressures that corporate-backed childcare businesses are eating our lunch because they can buy in volume. We have the challenges as independent owners that the YMCA doesn't pay tax. The Boys and Girls Club, the JCC don't pay tax when they're buying stuff, but I have to pay. We're looking at an industry that the regulations keep on getting added in and no one's taking regs out. They're just adding more and more regs in. They came in the other day and go, you need a refrigerator in every one of your infant rooms. They go, oh, we had one right out here. Oh no, you can't use it. You need it you're in New York State now. I've always been there. Yes, and I'm used to you coming in and telling me exactly what to do, and I did wrong. It's funny you didn't say that last one. But anyhow, we got a good relationship. So the fact is, though, regs are coming. You have wages. You got salaries. You got the millennial generation. You guys are having these pressures that's compressing, and it's compressing your margin. You're chasing enrollments, which is great. But you keep on chasing revenue, but chasing revenue isn't the only solution to growing your profitability, to be able to do rewards, to have more time back. It's expanding that margin of your business. So.